The night sky above Rabaul Harbor held no comfort for Private Kōji Tanaka. Where once he had found solace in the familiar constellations that reminded him of home, now he saw only vast, indifferent darkness, punctuated by cold, distant light. 3 years of war had taught him that the universe cared nothing for the struggles of men. "Another patrol tomorrow," Lieutenant Yamamoto announced, his voice flat and emotionless. "Tanaka, Suzuki, Nakamura, you 3 will scout the western ridge. Intelligence suggests American forces may attempt to establish an observation post there." Kōji nodded silently. The same nod he had given countless times before. The same nod that had led him through the invasion of China, through the Philippines, and now to this forsaken island in the South Pacific. New Britain, a place where the jungle seemed to breathe with ancient malevolence. Later that night, as his comrades slept in their makeshift barracks, Kōji stared at the lone photograph he kept hidden in the lining of his uniform jacket. His wife, Akiko, and their infant daughter, Yuki, whom he had never met. The child had been born 2 months after his deployment. In his darkest moments, he feared he would never see either of them. Sleep came reluctantly, and with it, the dreams. They had begun 3 weeks earlier, after his patrol had discovered an unusual cave system in the volcanic highlands. The local tribesmen avoided the area, calling it the mouth that swallows light. Imperial Command had ordered an investigation, suspecting it might serve as an Allied hideout or supply cache. They found no Americans there, no weapons, no supplies. Just ancient stone carvings that matched no known Pacific culture and a bottomless pit that seemed to absorb the beams of their torches. That night, Kōji dreamt of swimming through stars. Not floating, but swimming, as if the cosmos were an ocean and he a mere speck navigating its currents. And in the distance, something vast moved between galaxies, its attention momentarily caught by his insignificant presence. He awoke, gasping, drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. The dreams continued, growing more vivid each night. Sometimes he would see strange cities, built of impossible geometries, structures that folded in on themselves in ways that should not exist in 3-dimensional space. Other times, he witnessed civilizations rise and fall on distant worlds around stars that had died billions of years ago. And always, always, he sensed the presence watching him, studying him, waiting. "You look unwell," Sergeant Ito commented as they prepared their equipment for the morning patrol. "Perhaps you should report to the medical officer." Kōji shook his head. "I am fine, Sergeant. Just poor sleep." "The spirit of Yamato demands your full attention, Private," Ito replied sternly. "Your Emperor and your comrades depend on you." "Hi, Sergeant," Kōji responded automatically, the words hollow in his mouth. The Emperor, Japan, the divine mission. These concepts that had once filled him with fierce pride now seemed distant and small. How could the ambitions of nations matter when he had glimpsed the true scale of existence? How could devotion to an emperor mean anything when ancient intelligences older than Earth itself drifted between dying stars? As they moved through the dense jungle, Kōji felt increasingly detached from his surroundings. The heated arguments between Nakamura and Suzuki about their dwindling supplies, the constant threat of American patrols, the oppressive humidity that made their uniforms cling to their skin like wet paper, all of it seemed like theater. Actors playing at significance in an uncaring cosmos. "Tanaka," Lieutenant Yamamoto hissed, snapping him from his reverie. "Focus. You nearly walked into that clearing. Do you want to make yourself a target?" "Forgive me, Lieutenant," Kōji murmured. That night, the dream changed. He found himself standing on black sand beneath an alien sky, where 3 pale moons hung low on the horizon. Before him stretched an obsidian temple, its architecture reminiscent of the carvings in the cave. As he approached, he realized the structure was not built of stone, but of some living material that pulsed with slow, deliberate rhythm. At the temple's entrance stood a figure that appeared human only in the most basic outline. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long and jointed in impossible places. Its face, if it could be called that, was a shifting mosaic of features that never settled into any recognizable arrangement. "You have heard our call," it said, though it had no mouth that Kōji could discern. The words seemed to form directly in his mind. "Few of your kind can perceive the frequencies upon which we broadcast." "Who are you?" Kōji asked, surprised that he could speak in this dream state. "Names are a peculiarity of temporary beings," the entity replied. "We have existed since the first stars kindled in the void, and shall remain when the last light fades. Your kind calls us gods or demons or hallucinations, depending on the century and culture, all inadequate approximations. What do you want from me?" The entity's form rippled, as if the question amused it. "Want? An interesting concept. We do not want, as you understand it. We observe, we collect, we preserve." "Preserve what?" "Knowledge, experience, consciousness. Your war is destroying much that is unique, patterns of thought and culture that will never be replicated. We find this inefficient." Kōji felt cold, despite the lack of temperature in this dream space. "You speak of people as if they were specimens." "Everything is a specimen in the Museum of Existence," the entity responded. "But you misunderstand. We do not seek to collect physical forms, but the essence of experience. What your philosophers might call the soul." The entity glided closer, its movement fluid yet wrong, like oil flowing uphill. "We offer you a choice, Kōji Tanaka. Continue your part in this destructive conflict, adding your consciousness to the millions already extinguished, or serve as our emissary. Walk a different path." "What path?" Kōji asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. "Bring others to us. Guide them to the cave. Each mind that joins our collection is preserved for eternity, experiencing infinite realities rather than the brief flash of a single human lifetime." Before Kōji could respond, the entity reached toward him with an appendage that seemed both hand and tentacle. Where it touched his forehead, he experienced a momentary expansion of awareness, so vast and overwhelming that he fell to his knees, gasping. He saw Earth from above, a fragile blue sphere in the blackness. He saw humanity's brief flicker in the cosmic timeline, their wars and achievements equally meaningless against the backdrop of universal entropy. He saw the entity and its kind, ancient beyond comprehension, collecting the dying light of consciousness across countless worlds and preserving it in a realm beyond physical law. And he saw his wife and daughter, their futures if he never returned home. Akiko eventually remarrying, Yuki growing up calling another man father, the Tanaka family line continuing without him. There was pain in this vision, but also strange comfort. Life would go on, with or without him. "Choose," the entity said. Kōji awoke to the sound of distant artillery fire, American naval guns pounding Japanese positions along the coast. His decision crystallized in that moment of waking, as if the dream had unlocked something within him. He waited 3 days, going through the motions of his duties with mechanical precision while finalizing his plan. On the 4th night, when assigned a sentry duty at the eastern perimeter, he gathered what supplies he could discreetly take, a map he had carefully memorized, and slipped away into the darkness. Desertion was unthinkable for a Japanese soldier. Death before dishonor was more than a motto. It was the foundation of their military ethos. Yet Kōji found himself moving steadily through the jungle, away from his unit, away from the war, toward the cave in the highlands. He no longer dreamed of the entity or its temple. He no longer needed to. Its presence had taken up residence in some corner of his mind, guiding his steps with subtle pressure when he veered off course. Sometimes, when the jungle grew too dense or when American patrols came too close, he found himself knowing things he should not know, perceiving dangers before they materialized. On the 7th day, exhausted and half-starved, he reached the cave entrance. It looked smaller than he remembered, almost disappointing in its mundanity. Just a dark opening in the volcanic rock, partially obscured by vegetation. Yet he could feel the wrongness emanating from it, a subtle distortion in the air that made his skin prickle. As he prepared to enter, a voice called out behind him, "Tanaka!" He turned to find Lieutenant Yamamoto emerging from the tree line, pistol drawn. The officer's uniform was torn and soiled, his face gaunt with exhaustion. "You dishonor yourself and your ancestors," Yamamoto said, his voice trembling with rage or perhaps fear. "I have tracked you for days, watching you speak to yourself, move like a man possessed. What madness is this?" Kōji regarded his superior officer with something approaching pity. "There is no honor in this war, Lieutenant. No glory, no divine purpose. Just men killing other men while greater powers watch. Traitors talk," Yamamoto spat. "The Americans have broken your spirit." "Not the Americans," Kōji replied softly. "Something far older, something that offers preservation rather than destruction." Yamamoto's pistol hand shook. "You will return to face military justice, or I will execute you here as a deserter." Kōji felt the entity's presence intensify in his mind, whispering possibilities. He could overpower Yamamoto easily now, with the strange awareness that had been growing within him. He could know exactly when the lieutenant would fire, could move with unnatural speed to avoid the bullet. Instead, he extended his hand. "Come with me, Lieutenant. See what I have seen. Understand what I now understand." "Madness," Yamamoto whispered, but doubt flickered across his features. "Is it madness to question why we die for lines drawn on maps? To wonder what truly awaits beyond death?" Kōji took a step forward. "The cave shows the truth. About everything." For a moment he thought Yamamoto might lower his weapon. Then the lieutenant's expression hardened. "For the Emperor," he said, and fired. The bullet struck Kōji in the shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered but did not fall. With unnatural calm, he turned back to face Yamamoto, blood darkening his uniform. The lieutenant's eyes widened in shock and fear. "What are you?" he whispered. "Still human," Kōji replied, advancing slowly, "but connected to something greater, something that can preserve us all." Yamamoto fired again, the shot going wide as panic overtook his training. Before he could fire a third time, Kōji was upon him, moving with speed and precision that no human combat training could explain. He disarmed the lieutenant with one fluid motion, then gripped his arm with inhuman strength. "See," Kōji said. And somehow, impossibly, Yamamoto did see. The connection that had formed in Kōji's mind expanded, enveloping the lieutenant in a moment of shared consciousness. Yamamoto gasped, his eyes rolling back as visions of cosmic vastness overwhelmed him. When it ended, the lieutenant stood trembling, his face ashen. "The cave," he murmured. We must go to the cave." Together they entered the darkness, their rivalry and military hierarchy forgotten in the face of greater purpose. The passage descended steeply, the walls lined with the same strange carvings Kōji remembered. They glowed faintly now, providing just enough light to navigate by. The pit awaited them in the central chamber, a perfect circle of absolute blackness. Not darkness, but the absence of light, as if that portion of reality had been excised. "What do we do?" Yamamoto asked, his voice small and childlike. "We become the bridge," Kōji replied, the knowledge flowing from that foreign presence in his mind. "We open the way for others." They sat cross-legged at the edge of the void, facing each other across its diameter. Following an impulse he did not understand, Kōji reached out his hands. After a moment's hesitation, Yamamoto took them. The connection formed instantly, a circuit completed. The void between them began to change, to deepen and expand. Images flickered within its depths, faces of their comrades, of American soldiers, of local islanders. All potential converts, all future emissaries. Kōji understood then what the entity had truly wanted, not merely to preserve individual consciousness, but to spread, to grow, to consume. Each mind it touched would seek others, an exponential expansion across the war-torn Pacific and beyond. He should have been horrified. Some distant part of him was. But that voice grew fainter by the moment, as his identity merged with something vaster and colder than any human emotion. Days later, an American patrol investigating reports of strange lights found the cave entrance. 2 brave Marines ventured inside, but never returned. The commanding officer, showing unusual prudence, ordered artillery strikes to collapse the entire system. The official report mentioned only, quote, "possible Japanese activity and strategic denial of potential enemy assets." No mention was made of the dreams that plagued the artillery crew afterward, or of the 3 men from that unit who deserted within the week, heading into the jungle with blank expressions. By the time Allied forces secured Rabaul, the war was moving northward toward Japan itself. Strange reports from isolated villages in New Britain and New Guinea of returning soldiers who weren't quite right were lost amid the greater horrors of the Pacific Campaign. Kōji Tanaka was officially listed as killed in action, one of thousands of Japanese soldiers who disappeared in the jungle, their bodies never recovered. His wife eventually remarried, just as the vision had shown. His daughter grew up hearing stories of her brave father who died for the emperor. But in the dark places between stars, in the void between thoughts, something that had once been Kōji Tanaka continued to exist, continued to observe, continued to reach out to receptive minds in dreams, and gradually, ever so gradually, that reaching expanded beyond the Pacific, beyond Earth, toward distant worlds where other wars raged, where other beings looked up at their night skies and wondered if something watched them from the darkness. The entity that had once called itself gods or demons or hallucinations had found a new name, borrowed from the brief, bright consciousness of a Japanese soldier. It called itself Deserter, and like all deserters, it had abandoned one service only to find another,